Hello, welcome to the fourth video lesson on Introduction to Feminist Criticism. In the previous videos, we looked at the first and second wave of feminism as well as certain strands in the second wave feminism such as Marxist feminism, radical feminism, lesbian feminism and psychoanalytic feminism. In this video, we will look at the third wave of feminism. We already mentioned that there were many criticisms that were raised against second wave feminism, because of which there was a lot of backlash against second wave feminism for its inadequacy to address the concerns of women. So there were many reasons why people started seeing feminism itself as being inadequate or limiting or something, and because of that a certain term came about called post-feminism. Now, post-feminism has two distinct meanings. There are different ways in which the term post-feminism is used. In the first usage or the first meaning, post-feminism means that adherents of post-feminists believe that there is no more need for feminism since it has either failed or already achieved its goals. So one set of post-feminists believe that we are post-feminism. Feminism is over. Now there is no more need for feminism. Either because it has failed. So one set of those people think that feminism has failed. It is inadequate and it is useless and it doesn't help anybody. So there is no more need for feminism. The other way in which they think there is no more need for feminism is to say that feminism has already achieved all its goals, because initially feminists wanted certain rights, certain political rights, civic rights, economic rights, etc. And now they have all been given to us, and therefore there is no more need for feminism. The second way of understanding post-feminism is as a continuation of feminism, as realizing that feminism has certain limitations but taking it forward beyond its limitations. That is the second idea of post-feminism. Generally, feminist critics or critics who identified as post-feminists argued that feminism itself contributed to the image of women as victims, because feminism always talks about how patriarchy victimizes women and all the problems that women face. Because of that, some post-feminists held that feminism itself creates or constructs this image of women as victims. Some important authors who are identified as post-feminists include Naomi Wolf, Camille Paglia, Katie Roiff, etc. But many other post-feminist authors or many people who still had problems with feminism, however, rejected the term post-feminism. They didn't like to be called post-feminist authors or post-feminist critics because they felt that the term post-feminism has certain negative connotations. The term post-feminism seems to suggest that feminism is over. Whereas many people had issues with the kind of feminism that existed until then, and they wanted to go beyond those limitations, but they did not want to disavow feminism completely. They did not want to disown feminism completely. So some people consider that these same post-feminist concerns engendered what would come to be known as third wave feminism or the third wave of feminism. The central thesis of third wave feminism is that women are of many colors, ethnicities, religions, nationalities, and cultural backgrounds, and therefore homogenization of women's experience is impossible. Now, this was one of the main limitations or problems with both the first wave and second wave feminism, that they considered feminism to be monolithic. They considered women's experience to be monolithic and homogeneous. Homogeneous meaning that they are all the same. And third wave feminism basically criticizes this idea of homogenization, because they say that there are so many different types of women. There are first world and third world women, there are white women, black women, brown women, women from all kinds of ethnicities, women from different religions, nationalities, cultural backgrounds, and even, of course, different gender identities, sexual orientations, etc. And therefore it is impossible to homogenize women's experiences. So again, one of the important criticisms faced by second wave feminism was that it was essentialist or essentializing. Essentializing means to say that there is an essence of women's experience, that all women ultimately experience certain basic and fundamental things, and there are certain basic and fundamental elements that create our identity as women. But third wave feminism says that such essentialization or homogenization of women's experience is impossible. Third wave feminism is often considered to be a young women's movement because it was a new generation of feminists who were dissatisfied with the way the previous generation was functioning. And some of the first expressions of third wave feminism could be seen in certain youth subcultures. One such important subculture is called Riot Girl. You can see the spelling here, it is GRRL, Riot Girl, which is a feminist punk subculture which combined feminist concerns, punk rock music, and political activism, all expressed through several different methods like song lyrics, leaflets, zines. Zines are like small magazines, artworks, etc. So on the right side, you can see different posters, leaflets, zines, etc., that are associated with this riot girl subculture. And there were also many punk rock music bands that were involved with this. One of the important bands is called Bikini Kill. It was a very famous band during the 1990s. So this riot girl subculture existed mostly during the 1990s, but some elements of those persist even to today. This was one of the cultural reasons for, or one of the early cultural elements that led to the formation of third wave feminism. But there were some other incidents that are considered to be constitutive of this third wave feminism, and one of those was the sexual harassment allegation filed by the black lawyer Anita Hill against another black man, a black conservative judge named Clarence Thomas in the 90s, early 90s. In 1991, Clarence Thomas was nominated to become a Supreme Court justice by George H.W. Bush. And at this time, so he was a conservative judge. He was nominated by the Republican President Bush, and many Democrats got to know the people, the Democratic Party in America, which was the opposition party at that time, came to know that Anita Hill had previously complained privately to certain friends about facing sexual harassment by Clarence Thomas when she was working under him. So she was his subordinate and she faced certain kinds of sexual harassment by him. And this was brought up and it was made it became a huge case. That case was supposed to determine whether or not Clarence Thomas would be confirmed as a Supreme Court justice. And ultimately, he was confirmed despite these allegations by Anita Hill and some other women who came out against him. Clarence Thomas's nomination was confirmed, and people generally, Anita Hill had to do a hearing in front of the US Senate, and all the senators, most of the senators who asked her questions and listened to her allegations were white men. And she had to face a lot of problems because of that. And the strange thing that happened that many black feminists realized was that a lot of black men and even some black women supported Clarence Thomas by saying that whether or not Anita Hill's allegations were correct, The point is that Clarence Thomas would be then the very first black Supreme Court justice, and he was somebody who worked a lot for civil rights. And because of that, if he were to become a Supreme Court justice, he would be able to do a lot for the black community. And at that point, a lot of black women realized that, on the one hand, their experiences were not being taken into account by something like second wave feminism, which was a completely white women's movement. But on the other hand, even the black movement, the African American movement for civil rights, and the Black Panthers, and all those things that happened in the history of the black cultural movements and political movements in the United States, even that movement did not really support them, because with this case it became clear that their problems as a woman, Anita Hill's problems as a woman, as a black woman, were not considered as important as the black community's issues, which would be taken forward by somebody like Clarence Thomas. At this point, Rebecca Walker, who was the daughter of the famous African American writer Alice Walker, wrote an article in Miss Magazine in 1992, and this article was titled Becoming the Third Wave. So, Rebecca Walker says that when this Anita Hill versus Clarence Thomas case came about, Rebecca Walker had a conversation with her own partner, who was a black man. And in this conversation, this man said, "But what is a problem if Clarence Thomas becomes the Supreme Court justice? Maybe it is true that he has done all this, but it is important that he becomes a Supreme Court justice for our community." And then Rebecca Walker realized that even her own partner did not realize, even the black men in her own movement did not realize the problems of these women. And therefore, she wrote this article where she said all these things: turn the outrage into political power, do not vote for them unless they work for us, do not have sex with them, do not break bread with them, do not nurture them if they don't prioritize our freedom to control our bodies and our lives. And she ends it with this very famous quote: "I am not a post-feminism feminist, I am the third wave." So I am not a post feminism feminist, I am the third wave. So here she is saying, I don't call myself a post feminist because I don't want to sit and say that, either to say that feminism has achieved everything, because in our case, in the case of black women, definitely we have not achieved anything, or to say that feminism is limited and I will not associate myself with it. That is also not what I want to say. I want to take feminism forward into the third wave. I am the third wave. So, this article by Rebecca Walker is considered to be what gave the nomenclature third wave. Some of the key issues taken up by third wave feminism include violence against women, like rape culture, etc., sexual harassment in the workplace. All these kind of things were already being discussed, but they took those issues further and they made it much more democratic. Secondly, exploring women's sexuality. So, one of the key ideas behind third wave feminism is that any expression of women's sexuality is valid. So, there is earlier, during the second wave, some feminists, especially radical feminists, used to say things like sex is something that it gives power. Towards it gives power to men over women. So heterosexuality itself, or sexuality itself, is a site where power roles between men and women are being worked out, which resulted in many women feeling very bad about, or very shameful about their own sexual desires. So it was as if there are certain kinds of sexual expressions which are political and therefore to be encouraged by feminism, and certain other kinds of sexual expressions, like wanting to look beautiful, for example, that was considered to be wearing makeup and wanting to look beautiful and dressing up in a particular way, that was considered to be succumbing to patriarchy by the earlier feminist movement. And third wave feminists said there is no such thing like that. Whatever makes a woman feel happy, whatever makes her feel desirable, whatever ways in which she wants to express her sexuality, all those should be considered equally valid. And so there is a very famous play by Eve Ensler called The Vagina Monologues that was performed first in 1996. It is still performed at many places. And in The Vagina Monologues, Eve Ensler she presents many different situations relating to women's sexuality. Some of them are about violence against women, and some of them are about encouraging or exploring women's sexuality. Another key issue was, of course, that of reproductive rights, which was again something that was discussed even earlier. So, access to sex education for women, easy contraception for women, abortion, etc. These were again being discussed. This, again, you can see that certain issues continue from across the different waves. So, reproductive rights is definitely one of those. Then, an interesting element or an issue that was taken up by third wave feminists was reclaiming derogatory terms that were used to refer to women, like bitch and slut. These were words used by the patriarchal society to refer to women who did not conform to their gender roles. So, if a woman was very assertive, and if she did not if she did not obey the patriarchal rules, people used to consider her or call her a bitch, or she's such a bitch. There was nothing. The terms were used. A term like bitch was used only to refer to women who did not conform to certain gender roles. Again, the term slut was used to shame women who used to wear revealing clothes or who like to dress up and look pretty. So these kind of terms were reclaimed by the third wave. One such example was something called the slut walks, which started in 2011. The first slut walk started in 2011, and then there were many other such slut walks. These were a mode of protest against comments by public officials that linked women's dress to experiences of rape. So there were many instances where you can look up more about slut walks on Wikipedia, but there were many instances where a police officer or a judge said that, okay, it is bad that this particular woman was raped or had to face harassment. We will punish the person involved, but women should also take care. They should not dress in a particular way, and that is like asking to be raped. That is like, you must have heard this phrase, asking for it. So if you dress in a particular way, you are likely to be harassed or raped, and that idea is a kind of victim shaming or victim blaming. And calling out women for dressing like that is also called slut shaming. And as a mode of protest against such comments, many women got together, especially in American cities, and held a kind of protest called slut walks, where they would dress in revealing clothes and they would walk in a procession in the streets, and they would have all kinds of cultural programs, etc. So, reclaiming derogatory terms. An example closer home, which you might be very familiar with, is the reclamation of the term feminici. You know that in today in Kerala, especially in these digital spaces, we can see that many women who talk like a feminist or who talk about women's rights, women's equality, etc., are derogatorily termed feminici. It is a kind of very derogatory Manglish, Malayalam plus English slang word that refers to a feminist woman. And however, nowadays we can see many women reclaiming that term and calling themselves feminici. So the actress Parvati, for example, is somebody who has very publicly called herself a feminici. She was always shamed, or she was blamed in cyberspace, and she was harassed a lot for her feminist opinions, but she has reclaimed that. And many other women, you can see, especially in these online spaces, they have reclaimed that term. So this kind of reclamation of derogatory terms is something that you can see in third wave feminism. Then, of course, third wave feminism tried to give much more emphasis to race class, and issues of transgenders. These are again things that second wave feminism did not look at adequately enough, and therefore third wave feminism tried to take these kind of elements forward. Third wave feminism was also interested in many aspects related to women's experiences in the workplace, like workplace harassment, either sexual harassment or other kinds of harassment of people by their bosses, by their colleagues, just because they are women, not being denied leave, or being denied promotions, etc. The glass ceiling. Glass ceiling is a term which refers to how women find it much more difficult to get promotions after a certain point. So, if you look at a certain corporate office or a business office, many times what happened was that, especially at that time, in the until the 90s and all, women were getting employment, they were getting paid, but after a certain point, it was difficult for women to get promoted. So, mostly all the people in managerial positions as CEOs and other high level executives were all men, and it was very difficult for women to reach such positions of power, and that was called the glass ceiling. It's a kind of transparent ceiling where people behave. That particular organization will never say that we will not make a woman a manager or a CEO, but ultimately, practically, the women can never reach that position because they are not given promotion. Then there were other issues like maternity leave, welfare measures for single women, single mothers, etc. These were all part of the agenda of third wave feminism. In general, third wave feminism emphasized the diversity of women's experiences and encouraged every kind of expression of women. We have already mentioned this, but to sum up, that is the most important aspect of third wave feminism. Now, there are one or two other elements that we will discuss which are very important to third wave feminism, and the first one is intersectionality. Intersectionality is a term that was proposed by Kimberly Williams Crenshaw. According to Crenshaw, intersectionality refers to a theoretical framework for understanding how aspects of a person's social and political identities might combine to create unique modes of discrimination and privilege. And what are these aspects? Gender, sex, race, class, sexuality, religion, ability, physical appearance, etc. So all these things combine. So it is not that the idea of intersectionality is to say that it is not that all men are always powerful and all women are always powerless, or that all whites are always powerful and all blacks are always powerless. Basically, the power structure in society is intersectional. Some of these aspects combine. So I will give you an example. Very recently, you have heard about the murder of George Floyd by a policeman in America. George Floyd was a black man who was killed by a policeman, by a white policeman, and that led to another new wave of the Black Lives Matter movement. And one of the reason why Floyd was being arrested in the first place, he had not done anything. He had not done any criminal activity for which he was arrested. But a white woman, saw him and called the police and said that I saw this man going into this particular store and he looked suspicious. Now, there are many such instances of white women giving complaints against black men, saying that they look threatening or they try to threaten them, etc. In many cases, these black men are not doing anything. They are just walking, or they may have just looked at this woman, but the woman automatically feels threatened. And that is not just because she is a woman and she feels threatened by the patriarchal power of a man. It is also because she is a white person who feels threatened by the very presence of a black person. So here we can see that sometimes the white woman, even though she is a woman, has more power over the black man, even though he is a man, and that is because of their race. So like that, there are many such aspects that combine to sometimes create a situation of discrimination and sometimes create a situation of privilege. Therefore, interlocking systems of power exist in society, and these systems affect everyone, but mostly they affect those who are most marginalized in society. And therefore, if you are a black woman, for example, then you will face a double layer of oppression. You will be oppressed as a black person and as a woman. Similarly, it is said that immigrant women of color in first world countries like America face triple layers of oppression. As women, first of all, they are oppressed. Then they are oppressed as women of color. They are black or Hispanic or Asian or whatever. So, because of their race, they are oppressed. Then they are also oppressed because they are immigrants and they are not people who were born and brought up in that country. So, therefore, an immigrant woman of color might face more oppression than a black woman in America. A black woman, an African American woman who was born an American, might not face so much discrimination, whereas a Mexican immigrant woman, or an African immigrant woman or a Chinese immigrant woman in America might face much more oppression. Then intersectionality also means that feminism then worked in connection with other theoretical frameworks like eco-criticism, ecological work, and the trans movement, the movement of transgenders and transsexuals, and they combine to form new forms of feminism like ecofeminism and transfeminism. So that is about intersectionality. The second aspect of third wave feminism that is very important is sex positivity. Sex positivity means having a positive attitude towards sex. This is the idea that sexual freedom is an essential part of feminism. So, feminism should not be about restricting what kinds of sexual expressions are possible. So long as there is consent, there should not be any restrictions on what kind of sexual experiences are to be encouraged. Rather, any kind of sexual experience should be considered proper or should be considered equally valid for a woman. And this sex positive feminism resisted earlier feminist denunciations of pornography, for example, as promoting rape culture. And instead, these feminists accept pornography as a valid form of sexual expression. We have mentioned some of this in the previous video where we talked about the feminist sex wars, which was between a section of radical feminists who were against pornography and a section of women who could accept, who said that we should accept pornography as sexual expression of women as well. So they were, as I mentioned earlier, they were against the idea that sexuality is a mode by which women are only oppressed. Sexuality is fully oppressive എന്നുള്ള ഐഡിയയ്ക്ക് എതിരായിരുന്നു ഈ സെക്സ് പോസിറ്റീവ് വിമൻ. Rather, they said that in certain circumstances, there are circumstances where sexuality can be a mode of expressing power relations. It can be reinforcing patriarchal values, etc. But that depends on the consent of the women or the agency of the women. And so long as women are agential and women say that I choose to engage in this particular form of sexuality, then there is no question of denouncing it. So, therefore, the sex positive feminists also opposed the patriarchal control of sexuality. They said that patriarchy always wants to control sexuality. Patriarchy wants to determine what kinds of sexual expressions are valid or are allowed for women and what kinds are not. And therefore, the sex positive feminists held that feminism, in order to break this patriarchal control of sexuality, should endorse all kinds of sexuality so long as it proceeds from the control or the agency or the choice of women. And again, as part of this idea, they wanted to legalize sex work and provide welfare measures and rights to sex workers. So again, sex work, which was earlier called prostitution, was considered something very negative and completely patriarchal by earlier generations of feminists. But these sex positive feminists said that it is not necessarily always a humiliating thing or a derogatory thing for a woman to be involved in sex work. We should see sex work as another kind of of work, and those women who are getting involved in sex work, it could be because they have no other option. We don't know what their reasons are, but once they are actually in that domain called sex work, then they should be protected. They should have certain welfare measures, they should have rights. If those sex workers face any kind of oppression or harassment, either from the police or from their customers or from other quarters of society, then they should be able to claim certain reparations. They should be protected from such situations. Also, sex positive feminists supported queer sexuality and BDSM. Now, what is queer sexuality? We will look at queerness and queer theory and queer sexuality in more detail in a different video, in a different video lesson. But queer sexuality basically refers to non-normative sexual behaviors like the gay, lesbian, bisexual, etc. All those kinds of everything, the different kinds of sexual expressions which were considered to be non-normative by patriarchal society, all those are considered valid by sex positive feminists. And then there is something called BDSM. This is actually a very interesting term. It's an acronym, BDSM, but what exactly each of those letters stands for is also slightly it's not complete. There's no complete consensus about that, but generally we say that B stands for bondage, D for dominance or discipline, S for sadism, and M for masochism, or sometimes S stands for submission or submissiveness. So basically, BDSM refers to different kinds of sexual behaviors in which both men and women, it can be a combination of, it can be two men, two women, it can be a man and a woman, doesn't matter. But basically, what they do is they play or they enact certain situations in which sometimes one person is tied up, or somebody's eyes are blindfolded, or so they use certain kinds of instruments like whips or handcuffs or things in order to create an illusion that one person is in control and the other person is not in control. And this was initially considered very problematic. It was considered to be some kind of a deviant sexuality. It was considered also to be a kind of a means whereby power relations were perpetrated in society. But the sex positive feminists and supporters of BDSM said that BDSM actually is just a set of practices which are a form of play. So the people who are involved in it give their consent earlier. And there are a lot of rules about people not getting hurt. So these rules will make sure that the people who are involved in these kind of activities do not get hurt and they do not get humiliated. But sometimes people choose to engage in such activities, and that should also be supported. So all these are the different kind of new ideas of sex positivity which were brought about by the third wave feminists. The third wave also faced certain criticisms, just like this entire structure of seeing feminism in terms of waves also faced certain criticisms. Some of the important critiques of third wave feminism were like this. First of all, there was a lack of cohesion and clear goals in third wave feminism. This is because third wave feminism said that women's experience cannot be homogenized, cannot be essentialized, and therefore you can't clearly say that this is a woman's problem and this is not a woman's problem. So because of that, there is a lack of clarity about third wave feminism, and this also led to some people saying that there is no clear third wave feminism, there is no clear third wave, and some people say that this is just a continuation of second wave feminism. So that is one of the criticisms that was faced by third wave feminism. Then again, questions of inclusivity persisted in the third wave as it did in the first and second wave, particularly with regard to women of color. So women of color always felt excluded. They were not included in this feminism. Even though the third wave tried to be much more inclusive than the previous two waves, it was still criticized for being exclusive. then the very wave metaphor itself was criticized as being inconsistent, arbitrary, and limiting. So there was a problem that the wave metaphor privileges certain hegemonic strands of feminism. So the first wave, second wave, third wave, we will only look at those particular waves and what happens in between those waves, and what happens to those certain women or certain feminists who do not fit into those hegemonic or dominant or main strands of feminism that we consider these three waves, and what happens to all those who are in between the waves or who do not fit into those particular structures. They will be silenced. Another criticism faced by the third wave was that the emphasis placed by the third wave on individual autonomy, choice, etc., were actually subjective. So, when you say that a woman can dress in a particular way and that is her choice, then it's very confusing, what forms your choice and what doesn't form your choice, and also under what circumstances can you make that particular choice. Can everybody make that same choice in every circumstance? If you were in a different circumstance, would you still make that choice? So all these questions are there, and third wave feminism doesn't really go into those kind of details when they emphasize the autonomy or choice of each individual woman. Then again, the emphasis that was given on girliness, we said that it started as a young woman's movement against the previous generation of feminists. So there was a certain emphasis given to that girliness of, or the youthfulness of third wave feminism. And again, emphasis was given to individualism. And the criticism was that these things led to a certain trivialization of feminism and the consumerist appropriation of feminism. So when feminists said that it is okay to dress up and to feel happy, feel pleasure in your own beauty, in your own desirability, then that led to a lot of consumerist appropriation when beauty products and many things started targeting these young women and saying that wear these particular things in order to feel in control. So nowadays when you look at many advertisements, you will see that they are emphasizing the choice, the autonomy, the power of the woman, but ultimately they just want you to buy their products, right? So these kind of feminist elements are being appropriated by the capitalist or consumerist society. So all these were some of the criticisms that were leveled against third wave feminism. Now, some people say that there is a fourth wave of feminism, but there is no consensus about that. So, historians of feminism sometimes say that there is a fourth wave, and some say that there is no such thing. But those who say that there is a fourth wave connected to the use of digital media and technology. So they say that from 2010 onwards, or some people say 2012, some people say 2005. So basically, it is a post millennial emphasis. It is a post millennial aspect which is called the fourth wave, and it is characterized by the use of digital media, social media, technology, etc., which led to what are sometimes called hashtag feminisms, like these movements like hashtag me too, hashtag yes all women, etc. I'm sure all of you are familiar with hashtag me too. Hashtag yes all women was another Twitter hashtag which was about women talking about their experience of harassment, discrimination, etc., to say that all women, yes, all women have faced some kind of harassment, some kind of discrimination because of their gender. So these are some examples of how nowadays women use or feminists use digital media and technology. This what is called the fourth wave is also characterized by discussions around social privilege and the position that women from privileged groups should work for the less privileged. So the idea which is discussed more and more today is that, as we mentioned while talking about the third wave, there is this idea of intersectionality which says that it doesn't mean that all women experience everything in the same way. There are these many kinds of intersections of other aspects of your identity, your social identity, your cultural identity, etc., which determine whether you are privileged or non-privileged. And those women who are privileged should understand their privilege, should acknowledge their privilege, and they should try and work for those women who are less privileged. Then what is called fourth wave feminism is also something that is not taught academically. It is not a very formal movement like much of first and second wave feminism was, but rather it is considered to be learned informally by a new generation of women by sharing their experiences, especially through digital media and social media platforms. This fourth wave, those women who identify as fourth wave feminists, argue that patriarchal gender norms do not only constrain women, they also constrain men. Men are also forced to live in a particular way, which may be very different from how they actually want to live. And they say that we should try and free these men from these constraining gender roles. So the idea that men have to be always very strong, boys don't cry, as we mentioned in the first discussion of gender, and also that men have to be the providers of the family. All these different kind of things about how men should behave, how men should think, feel, etc., those are also constrained by patriarchal norms, and men should also be freed from that. So the fourth wave feminism is in some sense trying to form a solidarity across genders, between men, women, and transgenders, transsexuals, etc., by saying that everybody, all of us are constrained by patriarchy and we should all break out of those patriarchal gender norms. But those who critique the idea of a fourth wave say that it is very unclear whether fourth wave actually exists. Sometimes you can even say that fourth wave is just a continuation of the third wave, and therefore there is no consensus as to whether there is a fourth wave or not. So here we have finished our discussion more or less about the three waves of feminism. If you wish, you can call it the four waves of feminism, and you can look up much more details about it. This was a very brief introduction to the history of feminism, but you can look up more details online or in other texts and other works. In the next video, we will look at two strands of feminism which are generally associated with third wave feminism, but which can also be studied independently, which are Black feminism and Dalit feminism. So we will look at these two in the next video. And just one more thing I want to say before I stop is that even though we study the history of feminism in terms of these waves or in terms of these specific forms of feminism, there are two things we should keep in mind. One, as we already mentioned, is that these are just easy categorization. We are doing these categorizations in order to get a sense of history. But it doesn't mean that all feminism can be pushed under the umbrella of one or two of these categories. That's the first point, that somebody can be a Black feminist but also be an eco-feminist, but also be something else, but also be a lesbian or a trans feminist. All these things are possible. So there is no these categories by themselves are not mutually exclusive. That is the first point. And the second point is that again, we are breaking feminism down into so many different categories, but ultimately, if you think about it, all of it is about gender equality. All of it is about how gender should not be the means or the methods by which certain sections of society exert power over certain other sections of society. And it is just about the confusions or the differences in opinion are only about what constitutes these contours of gender or the contours of power, but actually all feminism can be considered to be talking about the same thing at a very basic level. So we will, in the next video, we will look at these two, Black feminism and Dalit feminism. Thank you.